Okay guys, so in this video we're checking out these Freewell ND filters for your Mavic Mini. When these filters came out, I think about 4 months ago, the Mavic Mini did not have firmware that allowed you to adjust the shutter speed. And that is, it does somewhat limit the functionality of the ND filter in terms of getting the precise shutter speed to get that 180-degree rule, to get that nice footage. You can still obviously use it in auto mode, and it will get pretty close depending upon your lighting conditions if you choose the correct ND filter. However, now in the latest version of the Mavic Mini firmware, you can adjust the shutter speed manually completely and get the exact footage that you want. Now, there are probably some situations where you're going to still want to use the shutter speed in automatic mode, especially if you're flying around in conditions where the lighting conditions could change from bright to dark, for example. Then you may want to use the automatic shutter speed. So the pack that I've got here is the I think it's called the All Day 8 pack. So it comes with 3 standard ND filters here. It's got an ND4, an ND8, and an ND16, and then you have a circular polarizing filter here with no ND filter. And then you have 4 more ND filters here with the circular polarizing function built in. And we got a ND8, 16, 32, and 64 with the circular polarizing function. And basically, it's an ND filter with a polarizer, so it allows you to adjust the polarization of the filter, so that if you have a situation where you're maybe filming like over water, for example, and you got a lot of reflections, it will reduce the glare and the reflections when you use the circular polarizing ND filter. So the test today, I'm going to be flying on a very, very bright sunny day. You're going to probably want to use the ND64 if you have like basically middle of the day, no clouds and full sunlight. This is probably the one you're going to want to use. We'll go out to the field and test that and see what the shutter speed is and what kind of exposure we're going to get. So as you can see here, this thing is very tiny, and it just connects to the camera module, these 2 hooks in the back. And let me just show you how you do that. You have to be very careful you don't damage anything when you put these on or take these on and off. But here on the camera module, on the back here, you can see that there's these vent holes, and that's where those little hooks are going to go into, and that actually holds it on. So you got to make sure that this is actually mounted properly. Otherwise, if you're flying around and this is not mounted properly, you could either get bad footage or the filter might pop off. So you want to make sure you get those hooks here in the back, like so. It's kind of tricky. You don't want to damage the gimbal, so you want to be very careful. And then in the front here, it's going to just snap in via friction, and that'll hold it in place. So let's hold it down like this. Like so, and you should probably test it and make sure that it's secure, it's not going to fall off. You can actually leave these on here. It does not affect the gimbal calibration when you power it on, if you're wondering about that. These are extremely light. Let me just show you how much these weigh, because I think a lot of people are worried that it might go over 250 grams, and it does not actually test this. The ones with the circular polarizer weigh about 1 gram, and I think that the Mavic Mini is about 249, just a little under 249. So with the filter on, the weight is coming in at just over 249, so 249.2 grams. So you're still under the 250 gram weight limit, so you don't have to register even with the ND filter on. Okay, so I'll go ahead and take this out to a flying area, and we'll get some footage, and I'll show you what it looks like in the app and how to actually set this up to get the right shutter speed, and how it will also work in automatic mode as well. So let's go ahead and take this for a fly and see how it performs. Okay, so I'm going to start off with the ND32 and with the polarizer and automatic shutter, 2.7K 30 frames per second. I'll go ahead and start recording video and take off.
Take off. The home point has been updated. Please check it on the map.
So So it's pretty windy right now. So I'm not going to be going too high. In fact, I want to stay low to the ground so we can get some good motion blur. You get to see the effect of the ND filter more. So let's go here. Let's go a little lower. And the sun's pretty much right ahead of us. So I'm going to try and get as low to the ground as possible so you guys can see that motion blur effect. On automatic shutter speed, so pretty sure it's going to be close to 1/60 shutter, but we'll test that once I switch to manual mode. I'm going to turn the gimbal down just a touch. And I'm going to do the same test here with the manual shutter, but do this first with automatic shutter. And we're just going to move forward at the same level. And we'll go ahead and stop and bring it on back. So you ought to see that motion blur in the grass on the bottom here. I start again from that same spot. And now I'm going to stop that recording. I'm going to switch over to manual shutter. So we can see here it's a little underexposed. It's showing a negative 1.7 exposure at 1/60 shutter at this light level. So it's a little bit underexposed. Actually, it's quite a bit underexposed. I did try ND16 earlier and it was actually overexposed. So in this situation where you're kind of in between, automatic shutter would probably be better, or you can adjust the shutter manually. So I'm going to actually have to increase the shutter speed to say like 1/100. Oh, I'm sorry, we have to actually go to like 1/30 here. And yeah, see now we're at 1/30. We're at negative 0.3 on the exposure, so a little bit underexposed is fine. So go ahead and let's see what that looks like. We'll start recording. Let's move forward. Alright, and bring it on back. So I'm going to try this again. I'm going to go in the other direction, so maybe having light coming from a different direction, although the sun's pretty much right overhead. It shouldn't matter. So stop that recording. I'm going to turn it to the side here. Yeah, it's still 1/30, it's still at negative 0.7 exposure. So still underexposed. Okay, so I'm going to go back to automatic shutter and turn on the recording. Let's go in this direction and see if there's any difference. And I can actually even see a little bit of motion blur in the video coming back on the phone screen. Alright, so stop that recording. And we'll go back to the manual. So again, when we go to manual, and 1/30 is the lowest that we can go. And this is not really ideal. So I'm going to go back to the ND16 filter, because we need to get more light in here. It's just too dark even at 1/30. But I'll go ahead and just show you guys what that looks like. Alright, so we're going to stop that recording, and I'm going to go ahead and switch the filter to the ND16, and we'll see what that looks like. Okay, so I got the ND16 filter on here. We're going to start another recording, and I have the automatic shutter on here, so it should be nicely properly exposed. Go ahead and take off.
Take off. The home point has been updated. Please check it on the map.
get to about the same spot here. And this is an automatic shutter on the ND16. You're going to see a little bit less motion blur, but let's go ahead and run these same tests. Bring it on back. Alright, stop that. I'm going to put it back on manual shutter. And now we're at 1/30, we're overexposed by 0.7. Let's go to 1/60 shutter. So now we're slightly underexposed. This is actually pretty good. So I was testing this at another spot and I was getting some different exposure values. So this is much better. So go ahead and start a recording here. This is ideal. So, and this lighting would go with a the ND16. Let's go forward here. Bring it on back. So that would be the ideal amount of light. I think the ND32 was a little bit too dark, and so I would recommend going with ND16. Obviously, you just check your values here and you'll know. So I'll go ahead and I'll turn it in this direction here, and we'll do the same test. I'm going to switch this back to automatic and run that same test I ran before in this direction. So with the ND16, even on automatic shutter, it is not that much noticeably different, at least on the phone screen. And we'll switch to manual shutter now. Oh, sorry, we have to stop the recording. You can't switch to manual shutter while it's recording. Switch to manual shutter. Start a new recording, and let's do that again. It looks about the same. So imagine on automatic shutter, it's about the same shutter speed with this filter. And bring it on back. Alright, so that should be a pretty good sample of all the different shutter speeds and ND filters that you could use, but let's just go up a little bit here. It's a little bit windy. I'm not sure how it's going to handle it, but we'll see how the exposure value varies as you get into as we get further up here. It's going to get brighter, and then I'm gonna actually yaw all the way around, and we'll see if the exposure value varies, because the sun is it's not directly overhead, but slightly off axis. And in different parts of the day, you're going to want to probably use automatic shutter. If you're, for example, if the sun's behind you or in front of you, then your exposure values are going to vary a lot more. And you can see here now I'm kind of facing towards where the sun is, right here, and you can see the exposure did increase to 0 from -0.3, so it's getting a little bit brighter in this direction. So I guess when you're facing the sun, the exposure is going to go up a little bit. So I say if you're in the middle of the day where you know that the lighting is not going to change much, just stick with one ND filter with the proper exposure and set the shutter manually. But if you're in a situation where your lighting will change as you're flying around, then I would say find the best ND filter you can and use automatic shutter. That way you'll get sort of the best of both worlds. If it's going a little bit underexposed or a little bit overexposed, the shutter will change as you're flying around. That's what I would recommend for using the ND filters. I think that way you'll get the best footage if you know your lighting environment is going to change. So now we're at negative 0.7. So in this direction here is at the lowest exposure at 1/60 shutter. So it does, you can see it does vary even a little bit here in the middle of the day. Anyway, I hope this video was helpful in terms of how to use the ND filters and get good footage on your Mavic Mini. And hopefully you can see the difference between using manual shutter and automatic shutter. Anyway guys, that's going to do it for this video, and I'll talk to you guys in the next one.